right, can y'all hear me? Awesome. Well, welcome to class. Thank you guys for your patience this past week, and looking forward to catching us up and hopefully, well, not hopefully, for sure, planning on next week, Monday, same time, and we'll have back-to-back classes this go around, and we'll get going. I'm going to get my Moodle pulled up here and see if I can squeeze it in to this class. Can y'all hear me okay, by the way? Okay, good. All right.
You're good.
There we go. I'm going to be looking up, I know, because I've got this humongous screen in front of me, but guess you can see the whites of my eyes. Well, tonight, kind of the game plan would be for us to really, more than anything, give you guys some space to ask questions related to topics covering really and truly weeks 1 through 3, 1 through 4. And if we run out of things to talk about, I've got plenty of stuff to talk about. And so I don't want to eat up the time by just covering stuff that I want to talk about, and I want to make sure to give you guys enough time to ask questions. But just to kind of catch everybody up for the class, you've got your weekly discussion questions, the quiz questions, I mean, and your 2 big exams already up and running. And you're welcome to use this time to ask me questions about the exam questions and things like that. Can't promise I will give you the answer, but I bet we will all arrive pretty confidently for the questions or the answers that they are not. And so that's how attorneys talk, by the way. And in other words, if you came tonight or tomorrow, or not tomorrow, next week, feel free to ask those questions, and it's kind of your reward is the ability to hopefully get to the bottom of any questions that you have on the exams. So, okay. With that said, I'll be happy to get us going and leave it open to you guys to ask away.
Hey, do you have
Uh-oh.
any
Can't hear
problems? Can you hear me?
That's on my end. Give me 2 seconds because
Okay.
my Bluetooth decided not to work. I put my Bluetooth in and it was out in my car, these little headphones, and they're hot. Yeah, my ear.
There.
Okay. Are you good?
Yep. I can hear you now.
Awesome.
Perfect.
So I do have a question about the quizzes, but I don't, not answers. I just,
Sure.
like, is there any problem with completing, like going ahead and finishing early before the semester ends? No problem.
Not at all. In fact, I opened everything up because there always are some folks that like to work ahead, especially during the summer times. If you've got vacations and stuff coming up, like there's just, everybody's just moving here and there so much. I just want to try to make it as flexible as possible. And
Yes,
so,
I really appreciate it. I just want to make sure that you wouldn't
Yep.
take offense to it or anything, but I'm trying to finish before I go back to work because I know once
Sure.
I go back, I won't have
It's-
the time. So I appreciate you having everything up.
Absolutely. Are you in school counseling or?
Yeah, and I
Okay.
go back on July 21st. So,
Ooh.
and yeah, in the beginning, is nuts. I mean, all year is nuts, but
The whole time. Yeah, I was about to say, it's like,
but the beginning of the year is
The whole reason we're here is because it's so nuts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Are you in school counseling too?
Yeah, I'm a behavior specialist at an alternative school.
Okay.
So I have my,
Awesome.
yeah, so I
Okay.
have counseling, but I'm already doing a lot of what LP, we're after, especially post COVID, just the
Oh, yeah.
trauma and everything that was before is magnified. So it's interesting going through this book.
Yes. Yep.
Most
Yeah.
definitely.
I think I've said it before, but our referrals have exponentially increased in private practice, and I mean, 4 years ago, I guess, gosh, yeah, beginning of 2019, I was maybe 2 months booked out at the most, and now we're pushing into December, and so.
Yeah. I can imagine. We can
And
imagine.
most of that is like pediatric, teens, and kiddos, and so
Mhm.
it's. I know that the adults are out there. It's just that people kind of prioritize their kids first. It's kind of the way it goes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They hired me and I moved into a crisis intervention position in November of 2020, going from a junior high counseling position to a high school intervention counselor. And so I was handling all of the crisis situations during, COVID, and I was the only one at the high school. And it about ended my career completely. I ended up walking away in like September 3rd of 2021. I mean, we were like, what, 3 weeks into school, and I just left. I left. I was unemployed for 6 months. I had to get therapy, do EMDR for secondhand trauma. I mean, it's just, so I'm really grateful to
Across the
be.
board. Teachers, like, it's funny, not funny, but like what you're saying is because what we're seeing is whatever trauma the adults, teachers, administrators, counselors had. I mean, we're just holding by a thread with, we have our trauma and then secondary trauma with all of the better.
Yes, along with our personal. Yeah, exactly.
So what we've seen is just like you said, teachers, counselors, admin walking out daily. Just
yeah. I felt like I at that point when I left, I knew it was my well-being, So, I mean, everything has luckily worked out, and I've been able to get some tremendous time. It wasn't time off. I mean, it was hard to live unemployed, but it gave me the space and the time to get some therapy. And I still kind of feel like I don't have the full capacity that I did beforehand, So, but I am just really, and I really thought, I mean, I would never listen to another story again, ever, like when I left. So I'm really happy that, because it's my jam. I love it. I really do, like these classes and everything. So I'm looking forward into segueing out of education and into
to the dark side.
Yeah.
We're doing it anyway.
I know.
You might as well get paid a lot more per hour.
Get paid and be able to schedule one at a time, No,
just do more
surprises.
Do more, be more effective, I think is true.
And that's and that's been the challenge too. So like in private practice, I've been in practice since 2013 essentially, and never once had a bad Google review. And COVID hit, and I've had probably maybe 5 or 6 now bad ones. And on top of that, I've had COVID 4 times. And really, this is a good segue into talking about the topics for this class, is because if you're an adult, well, anybody who has contracted COVID at any point, we know that it definitely makes it to the brain. And we definitely know that if you lose your sense of smell and taste, that it might, in most cases, it has caused some disruption to your cognition, and not just cognition, emotional regulation, sleep disturbance. And if you're, premenopausal, biological female, messing with hormones for sure. And so, since COVID hit in private practice, and I was teaching and all that stuff, and I'm telling you, like, for me, even my cognitive ability has become it's not that I wasn't ever a nutty professor, because I've always been, but it has been definitely more challenging, especially to get as much as I used to get done in the same amount of time. And I'm getting so many adult referrals of people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who've had COVID and are now stuck in the chronic COVID decline. And not necessarily, that they're declining. In some cases they might be, but it absolutely has affected our brains. And so on top of just the stress alone, we've also got the neurology that's been affected for many of us. And so we're doing the best we can. We have to remind ourselves of that. And if you're in grad school, that's just just repeat that over and over and over and over again, that you're doing the best you can. You're accomplishing something in the middle of a world that has become tremendously, I would say, just chaotic and traumatic. And in the long run, as y'all know already, you're gonna be helping so many people, and your life meaning will be amplified because of it. And certainly the pay and the flexibility, all that stuff is great. I say great, it's never enough, but it's the most meaningful thing that you will ever do, and that's for sure. Yep. Beyond
Yeah.
just the bad Google reviews. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the topics that I did want to touch on just a little bit tonight, was talking through adult, or what is supposedly adult onset ADHD, and talking through a little bit about depression and bipolar and schizophrenia, and how all of those overlap from a neuropsychiatric standpoint. And I'll be real brief, and I'll give you all some space to ask questions. But what I want to say is, the DSM-5 implies a level of discreteness between conditions that does not necessarily exist from a biological standpoint, meaning the same underlying genetic predisposition that causes somebody to have bipolar is essentially the same one that causes ADHD and Tourette's and schizophrenia, and autism spectrum and OCD. And so it's not that everybody has all those things, but the truth is that if you meet the diagnostic criteria for any one of those conditions from the DSM-5 TR, very, very likely you're going to have an above average, at minimum, of traits of all the rest of those things, if not also meet the full diagnostic criteria for a few of them. In other words, I've rarely met anybody who has ADHD and who isn't on the bipolar spectrum. Now,
Really?
Now, I'm not saying that they need to be treated for bipolar or formally diagnosed for bipolar, but when you look at like the bell curve for, let's just say, the general population and how many people, meet the DSM-5 official diagnostic criteria, well, it's an arbitrary cutoff in many ways, where like it's literally just like, well, if you have it, if you've got a manic episode for this long or a hypomanic episode for this long, then you officially have bipolar. But the truth is, you can have not enough symptoms to meet that diagnosis, but certainly still be on the bipolar spectrum. Does that make sense?
And you're saying because it's all the same part of the brain where this is being affected, so because of that part of the brain, it's almost impossible to not have it overlap with something. So do you just pick the one that you see the most symptoms with? I mean, that sounds ridiculous,
Well,
but looking like an ADHD with the differential diagnoses, and it's overwhelming. So
yeah. So here's the thing: if you go online, and I still get into like debates about this with psychiatrists. Psychiatrists are taught strictly from the DSM-5. They take neuroscience class, that kind of stuff, but really and truly what they do is they memorize the DSM-5. So do psychologists, but the difference is that they kind of focus so much on those diagnostic criteria that they forget that the brain, which is ironic that they forget, but they forget that the brain has neuroanatomical overlap and neurophysiological overlap, especially between neurotransmitter systems like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. And I'm here to tell you, I'll give you an example. So my cousin was a psychiatric nurse practitioner, has been practicing for forever, had ADHD as a kid. That was one of his subspecialties. He's about 48, I think, and ended up getting COVID. And this has been the case for a lot of folks in adulthood. Ended up getting COVID, which was enough to push him over the edge into having full-blown bipolar, like manic episode. Now, that's an N of one. That's real anecdotal, so I'm not going to generalize that, but I'll just tell you from experience, COVID especially has been shown to be it breaks down the blood-brain barrier and disrupts the monoamine neurotransmitter network, where if you've got a predisposition for OCD, I've seen so many people transition from that into like schizophrenia. I've seen so many people transition from having just autism to also having psychosis or bipolar. And certainly with ADHD being classically defined much more so of a cognitive issue like attention problems than it is emotional regulation difficulties. But the truth is that ADHD affects mood just as much as true bipolar does. It really does. And the reason why is because it's the same neurotransmitter network. And what ends up happening is once you tip the scales from a mood regulation standpoint, one way or the other into manic or depressive state, if you've got an ADHD brain, or if you've got a brain that's on the autism spectrum more so, or OCD, it's already predisposed to being hypersensitive to being tipped. And so the dynamics of how quickly it's supposed to get back to homeostasis is what the pathophysiology is. Does that make sense?
yeah, so it's a can't sound. You get, like you said, it's easily tipped, and once you're tipped, you can't self-regulate.
Yes. Yep.
And so there's it's
And
like video is it was talking about the executive, between doing and knowing for
Uh-huh.
ADHD. So
Uh-huh.
that makes sense because like with the students, we see so much of the emotional dysregulation with it. And that's what we've kind of been trying to put our finger on is, of course it's a huge thing, but we know so many of our kids have been diagnosed with ADHD, and it makes sense with the mood dysregulation. I just never put the two together, but it makes sense. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an aha moment that I
Sure.
wish I had earlier. And
Yeah.
because that is
Well, because everything you hear about, everything you read about, classically like delineates between ADHD, like concretely, like a hard cutoff between that and everything else.
mhm.
And it's a little bit different with kids. And I know that this class isn't directed towards, the child and adolescent side of stuff, but
Absolutely.
but but just to be brief on that front is that mood regulation difficulties, well, the best way to summarize it is that your brain and that monoamine neurotransmitter network it's learning from genetics, what you're born with, and then the interaction of what you're born with and the memories of like emotional regulation, let's just say. Like when you're born, your brain has a genetic memory of how to regulate emotionally to some extent. If you've got ADHD or bipolar or whatever, it's got a difference in how that memory reacts to the environment, which
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
inception until age 25,
Right.
the environment is building or shaping or teaching the brain how to self-regulate. And so you end up getting children with, let's say, ADHD or trauma, whatever you want to say, call it, who swing too high one way or too low the other way. And then without intervention, the brain learns how to be that way.
Setting those pathways, and they're just
Yep.
concreting them almost like that's kind
It
of
gets conditioned and builds itself to be dysregulated into adulthood. And then once you hit adulthood, that's the fallout that you're coming into. Now, does that mean that there's no hope? Absolutely not. There's absolutely hope. And especially the younger you are, the sooner you catch it, the quicker we can get back into regulation. And that's going to be in part, in my opinion, it's going to be in part through psychotherapy, learning, basic like self-regulation skills, or trauma, like getting the trauma treated, stuff like that, on top of also working with the chemicals to help the neurotransmitter system stay in check. That's why people with bipolar, by the way, report improved, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. People with ADHD will report improved attention span, executive function whenever their mood is treated effectively, because that overlaps. And so I don't know if that was to put it simply, but it really is best described as having a brain that is learning how to build itself in emotional regulation, and like from a chemical standpoint, because if you get too revved up into mania, the brain is supposed to recognize that and say, whoa, 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 we've got too much norepinephrine, too much dopamine, too much serotonin, pumping. Let's scale back those neurotransmitter systems back down to homeostasis. But if you've got the genetic predisposition for any of those diagnoses that I said, it has a harder time recognizing that. And then if an environmental factor like COVID, for example, as stress or trauma comes along and amplifies it, makes it worse to where homeostasis is even harder to get to, now we've got it all, right? That's how we end up getting it all. And when I say get it all, we've all got it all. We've all got OCD, we've all got bipolar, we've all got depression, we've all got anxiety, all that stuff. It's just that there's an arbitrary cutoff point of official meeting the diagnosis, but you're going to have symptoms even before that. And so you might not meet the full criteria, but there's no doubt if you've got that genetic predisposition, which is about, they're looking at about 1/3 of the population has that ADHD, schizophrenia, OCD, bipolar, autism predisposition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, and that's because I don't know what everyone else is seeing too, but that in the post-COVID, a lot more. Of course, I work with adolescents, so schizophrenia isn't really a diagnosis, but we're seeing a lot more of those types of behaviors and mood regulation disorders.
Yep.
And so, like, again, we're just trying to piece it all together, but this all makes sense that it's all kind of dormant there in the brain. And if
Yep.
one is heightened, and like you said, then you put these other factors in there, it really is one big umbrella.
And that's called the kindling effect or the kindling theory. Like, let's see if I can.
So is treating the ADHD enough? If that makes sense. Like, so you have an adult that comes to you and they're showing these symptoms. Do you start with the ADHD and treating it, or do you do whichever is more prevalent? Does that make
Well,
sense?
and so when we say treatment, essentially, I'll talk about it from a psychiatrist like viewpoint and then from a psychotherapist viewpoint. A psychiatrist is going to treat symptoms. And what that means is that whatever symptoms are causing the most dysfunction in that person's life, whether it's a kid or an adult, that's what they're going to medicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the idea, well, what they don't realize is that by doing so, it will also help with other things that indirectly. So, like, again, if you've got ADHD and all of a sudden you have a manic episode, let's say you're 19 years old and you get treated for the manic episode with a mood stabilizer, well, lo and behold, as it turns out, one of the mood stabilizers, or really technically it's a second generation antipsychotic, what it does and why it's effective is that it takes away dopamine in the limbic lobe, which is the emotional like processing center. And then it also gives dopamine to the frontal lobe. So it helps people concentrate better, have better executive functioning, while taking away the overexcitation of the temporal lobe. That's literally how the second generation antipsychotic / mood stabilizers work. And so what ends up happening, somebody with manic episodes treated with that, and it actually helps improve their ADHD. But psychiatrists won't talk about it that way, nor will they say, hey, we're going to treat ADHD as a primary condition over the other stuff. They'll never do that, and mainly because it requires psychostimulants, and usually people with mania, the last thing they're wanting to do is give them a stimulant, because that person's having a hard enough time sleeping anyway. And so their whole paradigm has to operate out of a high level of discreteness between this stuff, as compared to a psychotherapist where, in my opinion, if somebody has ADHD, it's not that we're going to just treat the ADHD. What we're going to do is we're going to conceptualize all of their challenges from an executive functioning dysregulation standpoint, including if they're having bipolar, mania, or depression, OCD, and so forth. And so, in other words, we can't separate those in the same way psychiatrists do, because ultimately you won't get anywhere, in my opinion. Now, depends on if you're talking about inpatient, versus like outpatient. In an inpatient situation, we're going to just treat the mania by like helping people learn some real concrete behavioral, like stress regulation skills. But we say that and we call it that, but the truth is we're teaching executive functioning. I mean, literally, like it's the same stuff that you would teach a kiddo with ADHD who's having a hard time self-regulating, or a kiddo with autism having a hard time self-regulating. It's the same skills. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep.
And so I guess to answer your question, psychiatry hasn't caught up with that yet, and I'm not sure that they're going to catch up anytime soon, mainly because the DSM-5 is written for the court of law, and it's not necessarily written for what's clinically relevant or even helpful, since the neuroscience continues to pump out the information on, hey, there's a lot more overlap with all this stuff here than what we want to really admit to. Because it's a lot easier just to call it bipolar and treat it as bipolar than it is to try to conceptualize it as bipolar and ADHD.
So
that's the
I
truth.
think that overlapping that you're talking about is really interesting because I had a full hysterectomy in March of 2020. It was like one of the last surgeries that was done, which pushed
Wow.
me into full menopause immediately,
Yeah.
right? And then I moved to that position, and then I walk away from my job. And I mean, I feel like, and I was really struggling with some perimenopause symptoms, all of them, mentally, physically, mood, all of it. And it's just, I feel like that's a whole nother area as well, that we're missing so much education, so much treatment for what is happening during menopause for women. And it made me think I had every disorder on the planet.
I agree, because we've seen it too a lot with some PMS symptoms that I'm telling you are almost psychotic.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, it's rough. And you just, and then too, you put on that whole stigma of, God, I can't be a crazy lady, you know? And so we really suffer in silence. And I just keep feeling myself being pulled to kind of help in that direction, just because I've had such personal experience with it recently. And that wasn't like my target of where I wanted to work at all, but just because of everything recently. And so I definitely think there's just, man, there's so much going on there.
I like that.
Yep. I'm gonna share, and I guess I haven't posted this slide for you guys, but so I'm extremely passionate about not just ADHD in women, but just what y'all are describing and talking through, because it's like medicine has just figured out that half the population are women.
Thank you. It's true.
And what's wild is that all of the research in relation to like psychiatry and medication and like intervention is geared around men between 18 and 25, white men. It's all the college kids that are doing these research studies, trying to make, $7,000 to go live for a month while they, are guinea pigs, basically. And so here's the thing. Well, I would say, if you remember nothing else about today, something like 50, here, I'll show you the slide. Let's just get there. Make this bigger so I can get there.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Yeah, I'm going to give this to you guys.
Do you see it though, like in your professional field when you're talking with other people? Is this like are other people also starting to kind of be like, hey?
Nope. And it drives me bananas.
Right? Because it's so valid. I mean, and when you really, like you said, the hormone disruptors and the neurotransmitters, like all of it tells a story.
Look at this. PMDD.
Yeah.
45%, 45, almost 46% of women with ADHD have PMDD.
And could that even be misdiagnosed as, and hear me out on this, like you talk about the bipolar, because we're looking at a cycle that's almost, that we could see as a bipolar cycle, but is really a hormonal cycle.
I would love to give you extra bonus points for what you just said, because I'm telling you, yes, so many women with hormonal dynamics that have that predisposition that I was talking about end up getting misdiagnosed and treated for bipolar. And it might be that they meet the full criteria for it, but folks, I'm
It's not the
telling you,
root. It's not the
it
root.
is not the core problem. No, it's the
That's
symptoms.
so amazing. I've been,
And
because they're so set on ADHD, like everything I've known, that it had to be, something that I had seen in myself as a child, as a young kid. And my nickname at work is Squirrel, and
sure.
and people try and tell me all the time, and I'm like, no, I would have had it when I was a kid. It's just hormonal. It's just menopause. It's just my burnout,
Well,
everything I went through.
so what y'all were talking about, let me see. I know this is probably making you sick looking at this, but let me get there.
There we go.
Yeah.
None. No
Right.
stuff.
Shocker.
None. No, but it really does
Shocker.
surprise me that there's not even a small set of this obvious.
Man.
Oh,
Man.
That last point where it says change in the hormonal milieu may be involved in, or interact with neurotransmitters.
I'm
yes,
telling you.
I mean,
the
like,
cognitive piece, the cognitive, and you think and that's what I think too. It comes down to a societal level. If then again, you're just a crazy lady.
It's systemic. I mean, it's just.
it is very much systemic.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I'm telling you, Dallas is a big place, and I'm not saying that I know everybody, but I have tried hard to find either an OBGYN or a psychiatrist who specializes and understands all of this stuff. And I'm telling you, there's nobody out there like that.
It's stupid to say why, because again, like we know the hormones run the whole body. Like, that's your whole system. That's the engine that's running it.
So what ends up happening, and I'll describe it this way, and it's not just with ADHD. I know these slides say ADHD, but you gotta, whenever I say ADHD,
it's the umbrella.
It's the 1/3 of the population is what I'm saying. And here's the thing. The other thing is that all of these diagnoses, and this is where I've been wrestling recently, all these diagnoses imply that we live in a perfect world.
Yeah.
And so like people talk about, there's an overdiagnosis now of adult, ADHD. Well, not necessarily, because there's a lot of people who meet the criteria now that never did, simply because our world is demanding more from our frontal lobe than what is neurologically capable. It's the same way with PTSD, where it's not a veteran's problem that they were psychologically weak, that they couldn't handle war. War is wrong.
Yeah.
Nobody's supposed to have, and not just war, but anybody who has PTSD, what they went through is wrong. They should not have ever had to go through that. That's what's broken.
Right.
The person's not.
Response. Yeah, that's a normal response to an adverse environment.
ADHD, the 1/3 of the population, I'm telling you, it's not that 1/3 of the population is broken. It's that we're living in a world that is causing us to have more difficulty exponentially, because of the demands are so far beyond what our brain can handle. And going back to what I described with PMDD in women and with ADHD, or that 1/3, the underlying reason is that, so women women outside of the 2/3 that don't have that predisposition, halfway through their cycle, estrogen levels plummet, right at ovulation. We know, and you can look it up, estrogen level, you can just think about like there being a string attached from estrogen to the neurotransmitters serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine.
Yes.
And so when estrogen levels drop, they bring down norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Everybody on the planet agrees with that. If you're in the lucky 2/3, what that means is when that drop happens, the brain recognizes that drop and says, whoa, 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 we've got too low of these neurotransmitters. Let's
And
build
again,
some
that
more.
homeostasis.
Yep, let's build some more receptors to get back to homeostasis. And when it does, you might have a couple days that are a little bit low, and then you kind of course correct back to even or close to even, right? And then you go throughout the rest of your cycle. The unlucky 1/3, or however you want to look at it, when that happens, when that drop happens, the brain takes longer before it recognizes that drop. And so what ends up happening is that drop goes lower, first of all.
Yep.
So depression, and not just depression, suicidal depression, intrusive thought kind of depression, OCD kind of depression. And on top of that, all the cognitive, executive functioning or dysfunction that goes with it, including emotional regulation. It takes longer for it to recognize, and when it does, this is
Self-regulate.
the genetics say, whoa, 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 we gotta, red alert, and it produces too many receptors, causing it to spike into like what seems like hypomania or mania, and then you end up getting, diagnosed with bipolar mania when in reality this is the 1/3 of the population of women who have a brain that's not as dynamic as the other 2/3. And the truth is
what do we do? How do we change this? That's a simple question.
Education. And here's the thing, I know it sounds like I'm just saying a bunch of just theories out there, but
oh no,
you can go look at
good.
These puzzle pieces are all out there.
Yeah, it's all out there, but the stigma associated with it has so many people suffering in silence, because the moment you open your mouth, everybody just thinks you're a crazy bitch. Oh, sorry for inappropriate language.
Beth, that's the first time anybody's ever cussed in art classes in the history of Amberton, just so you know. You're welcome to
You know what I mean, though? So
you're okay.
I really suffer alone, and you be quiet, and you're like, okay, I'll do better tomorrow. I'll get it together tomorrow. And so you don't want to say anything. And it's really sad.
And you get a lot, and nothing against PCPs or family doctors or, even psychiatrists. You get a lot of male and female doctors prescribing that will roll their eyes and say, well, why don't you try 20 milligrams of Prozac, come back next month.
Yes.
Tell me how that's
they humiliate you. Yeah, they make you feel even worse. It's really a problem. It's sad.
And it's not just emotional functioning, guys. It's also, the PMS. What separates PMS from PMDD, by the way, is PMDD is the psychological aspect of it, the behavioral, emotional regulation stuff. PMS is the physical symptoms.
The pain, the cramping,
that
part.
The nerve pain, the sleep disruption, the fatigue, the headaches, the migraines.
No sleep to it.
And I'm here to tell you that in the same way that the psychological has a biology driving it, so do those physical symptoms.
Oh gosh, yeah, I would think so. I'm sure you could just look at hereditary genetically. You could see if you did a study, like on women, you could go back generations, really.
Yep. And so many women have been told that it's in their head.
It's just a natural process of life.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people say.
I think it's perspective too, and I think just bringing more perspective to the table.
So anyway. Here, if you want to know, and let me do this. I'll share. I'll post all this stuff as soon as we get done. I'll post all this stuff in Moodle so that you'll have it. But there are some treatments coming out finally that are starting to understand, hey, this stuff's real. And let's see.
That's good though. That's some progress though. That's like I said.
Can y'all see this?
Yeah.
Yep. April of 2023, guys. we're living in the future, and they're just now saying, oh, well,
Hmm.
maybe there's something, maybe women do have actually different like stuff. Yeah. So the selective progesterone receptor modulator, from a pharmacological treatment anyway. But how healing might it be? And I'm not saying might, I know it is, because I've had this conversation a million times already with the patients that I've seen, the women that have come through with ADHD. It is extremely healing to hear and to find out, hey, you're not crazy.
Yes. Like I
You're
think that
in.
could be, I don't know, because like you were talking about too, like yeah, it's kind of, it's really profound.
Another problem is hormone replacement therapy has a stigma associated with it as well.
Yep, it
Um,
does.
and the treatment is probably the best thing for women, yet there's such falsehoods associated with it that a lot of women are terrified to even be on it. Now, there are certain situations where they have to be careful with cancer in the family and such, but
Right.
overall, it should be an acceptable treatment, and it's still not. A lot of doctors won't do it.
Well, and I'll show you. So the hormone replacement treatment for PMDD is actually Stella, I think is the name brand of but
Stella?
yep. That's the selective, that's this right here. Ulipristal acetate, UPA.
And they're finding that that hits that receptor, this progesterone receptor,
Yep. So
all going down. So they're trying to work within that.
it gets a probably even beyond what I can even conceptualize fully yet.
Yeah.
But basically, progesterone acts as the middleman between the estrogen drop and the dynamic genetic predisposition. Like it acts as like it's what communicates, hey, there's been a drop.
That's cool.
The progesterone receptor, you're saying that's the part that would signal to the brain, hey, we've had something's going on here.
Yep. And we need to upregulate to a certain level. Like it's basically the feedback mechanism.
Very cool. Very cool.
Now, in the end, I mean, they're just now on the study side of this. So if you go to OBGYN, this is what's frustrating. I know this, but I'm telling you, you can go to, I bet you can list them out, any OBGYN, and they're not going to know that.
Mhm.
You're going to go
Right.
to them and say, hey, I've got PMDD. I heard Stella might be a good option for me. They're going to roll their eyes and prescribe Prozac and say, come back in a week. Actually, not Prozac. They'll prescribe Wellbutrin, and then you'll be back in 3 days later after you have your first panic attack. So
Thank you. This is a great conversation right here. I just appreciate this.
yeah, well, like I said, I'm very passionate about this stuff. I will post all these resources, and it blows my mind how much information, like it's all the puzzle pieces are out there. It's just nobody has really done the work to put it all together yet, honestly.
Let's do it. Come on, let's do it.
Hey, I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
Dr.
If I could
Armstrong,
get caught up on
whenever
these emails.
yeah, when we start talking about things like this, though, especially in the environment we've got today, I get concerned about how much of this will ultimately, it's good stuff, but how much is going to end up getting pushed down and derailed because it gets entangled with the transgender conversation and what defines a female, right? And
But not really
I
from a
only say
clinical
that,
standpoint. You don't
yeah.
see that as much, though, to be honest with you.
Really?
I mean, I know we're in Texas and we're in a different culture than, my friends up in Colorado who deal with it a lot more, but it is something that happens regularly in my practice, but not something that has seemed to derail the truth of the matter, I guess. Yeah.
Well, that's encouraging because, when you see it play out on the national stage,
The politics behind it.
yeah,
Mhm.
it just seems like so much of that, women's rights and women's issues start becoming entangled in that other conversation. And
Mhm.
it's like, how do we protect, women in our society, right? And these types of studies and this kind of treatment to keep it progressing without it getting entangled or embroiled in those other
Right,
conversations.
right. And that's where I really make a point to, one, obviously always be sensitive to all the cultures out there, including transgender, because I'm here to tell you, if you really want to know the science behind all that stuff, you are welcome to explore it. And I have explored it, and I am firmly in the camp that believes that some folks have a brain that is wired completely different than others. I promise you that's the truth.
Mhm.
With that said, I would say that classically biological females have been oppressed, like beyond any other class out there, in my opinion, just historically. And there are those on the political front that seem to want to continue that oppression. And it's unfortunate. But from a clinical standpoint, we're on the I'm hopeful that we're on the precipice of figuring out, hey, there really is some amazing opportunity to heal and help half the population with some of these new, the new science that's coming out.
Yes.
And just in my experience so far, people have been much more excited to be on board for that than they have to even mention it in relation to any of the other um, um, populations. And so it's a touchy subject, and I know, but at the same time, we have women who are suffering in silence and who have a lifetime of shame that they've lived because this stuff, by the way, this stuff begins probably around 10 or 11 for most biological females, for 1/3 of the population. And so if you look at like relational dynamics beginning around then, right,
And
the
even job
ability,
dynamics, the social, your job dynamics, relationship dynamics.
yep. And I'm telling you, the implications are like huge. But it's going to take us educating people one at a time. And
Yeah.
and really and truly, I'm glad we had this conversation because, like I said, I am passionate about it. But I will post all these resources. And Rhonda, I hope I answered your question.
You did. I appreciate
Okay.
it.
Yep, absolutely. But I will post all this stuff and let you guys read through all that, and don't get lost in all the. I mean, I get lost in all the big words that they try to use, but the truth is that we're in a place where, and not just with women, it's also with men too, because there's an aspect of testosterone stuff that we're talking about here too, and figuring out that men have monthly cycles
They
and
do.
even have like
Yeah.
in relationships, even have how women link up right with their cycle, men also do too, that they're discovering that with like testosterone and all that kind of stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Um but that's where, like, it's not to uh not to say that it's the end all answer, because there's still a lot we don't know, but there's a lot more out there that we do that nobody is using when it comes to conceptualizing this stuff. And it goes a long way. Once, like, I've taught several women now, like the same thing that we've talked about today, like as patients, and they're just beside themselves because now they've got more information than I'm telling you than most OBGYNs do. So when they go, they're empowered. They're like, no, this is actually what the research says. Here's the research. You can read it for yourself. And thankfully I've had a few that have reported back, not a lot because I don't hear back from a lot, but a few have reported back that changes in either hormone replacement and or even medication adjustments for half the month has been a huge difference, a huge difference. And they're
That's
just, you
awesome.
know, grieving
great.
now in therapy. And that's really where therapy comes in. They're grieving in their own therapy about the years they've spent half their
awesome.
life, yeah,
Mhm.
without an answer.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just white knuckling it, really.
Yep. Yep. Just toughen it out.
Suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah.
Pretend like it doesn't exist. Yeah.
So fascinating. This really sparked a bunch of stuff. So thank you.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'm gonna probably have to head out real quick because I got my next class, but I will post this real quick and then I'll jump into my next class and I'll post it in week 5 just so you'll know all the stuff.
Thank you.
Okay. Absolutely. It's good to see y'all.
You too. Take care.
We'll see you next week.